Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for March the 20th. Today we are reading together in Leviticus chapter 7. Let me get the text up on the screen for us so we can read along together. This particular chapter is going to rehash a couple of the offerings and sacrifices that we've already seen, the guilt offering, the fellowship offering, and then it's going to give some more meat to the bones of talking about why blood and uh, fat were reserved only for Yahweh. And then finally, it's going to end this chapter by looking at the provisions that are given for the priest who are ministering for the people. It's basically the way for them to be supported as they're doing this work of ministering for the people as priests. So let's read here together in Leviticus chapter 7 and verse number 1. Leviticus 7, verse number 1. Now, this is the law of the guilt offering. It is especially holy. The guilt offering is to be slaughtered at the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered, and the priest is to splatter its blood on all sides of the altar. The offerer is to present all the fat from it, the fat tail, the fat surrounding the entrails, and the two kidneys with fat on them at the loins. He will also remove the fatty lobe of the liver with the kidneys. The priest will burn them on the altar as a food offering to Yahweh. It is a guilt offering. Any male among the priests may eat it. It is to be eaten in a holy place. It is especially holy. The guilt offering is like the sin offering. The law is the same for both. It belongs to the priest who makes atonement with it. As for the priest who presents someone's burnt offering, the hide of the burnt offering he has presented belongs to him. It is the priest's. Any grain offering that is baked in an oven or prepared in a pan or on a griddle belongs to the priest who presents it. It is his. But any grain offering, whether dry or mixed with oil, belongs equally to all of Aaron's sons. Verse 11, now this is the law of the fellowship sacrifice that someone may present to Yahweh. If he presents it for thanksgiving, in addition to the Thanksgiving sacrifice, he is to present unleavened cakes mixed with olive oil, unleavened wafers coated with oil, and well-kneaded cakes of fine flour mixed with oil. He is to present as his offering cakes of leavened bread with his Thanksgiving sacrifice of fellowship. From the cakes, he is to present one portion of each offering as a contribution to Yahweh. It will belong to the priest who splatters the blood of the fellowship offering. It is his. The meat of his sacrifice, of his Thanksgiving sacrifice of fellowship is to be eaten on the day he offers it. He may not leave any of it until morning. If the sacrifice he offers is a vow or a free will offering, verse 16, it is to be eaten on the day he presents his sacrifice, and what is left over may be eaten on the next day. But what remains of the sacrificial meat by the third day must be burned. If any of the meat of his fellowship sacrifice is eaten on the third day, it will not be accepted. It will not be credited to the one who presents it. It is repulsive. The person who eats any of it will bear his iniquity. Meat that touches anything unclean must not be eaten. It is to be burned. Everyone who is clean may eat any other meat, but the one who eats meat from Yahweh's fellowship sacrifice while he is unclean, that person must be cut off from his people. If someone touches anything unclean, whether human uncleanness, an unclean animal, or any unclean abhorrent creature, and eats meat from the Lord's fellowship offering or fellowship sacrifice, that person is to be cut off from his people. Yahweh spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are not to eat any fat of an ox, a sheep, or a goat. The fat of an animal that dies naturally or is mauled by wild beasts may be used for any other purpose, but you must not eat it. If anyone eats animal fat from the food offering presented to Yahweh, the person who eats it is to be cut off from his people. Wherever you live, you must not eat the blood of any bird or animal. Whoever eats any blood is to be cut off from his people. Yahweh spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites, the one who presents a fellowship sacrifice to Yahweh is to bring an offering to Yahweh from his sacrifice. His own hands will bring the food offerings to Yahweh. He will bring the fat together with the breast, and the breast is to be presented as a presentation offering before Yahweh. The priest is to burn the fat on the altar, but the breast belongs to Aaron and his sons. You are to give the right thigh to the priest as a contribution from your fellowship sacrifices. The son of Aaron who presents the blood of the fellowship offering and the fat will have the right thigh as a portion. I have taken from the Israelites the breast of the presentation offering and the thigh of the contribution from their fellowship sacrifices, and have assigned them to the priest Aaron and to his sons as a permanent portion from the Israelites. This is the portion from the food offerings to Yahweh for Aaron and his sons, since the day they were presented to serve Yahweh as priest. Yahweh commanded this to be given to them by the Israelites on the day he anointed them. It is a permanent portion throughout their generations. This is the law for the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the ordination offering, and the fellowship sacrifice, which Yahweh commanded Moses on Mount Sinai on the day he commanded the Israelites to present their offerings to Yahweh in the wilderness of Sinai. And that is Leviticus chapter 7, and moving on from here, beginning in chapter 8. I think chapters 8, 9, and 10 are going to focus more on the priest and some of the dealings concerning the priest. So we'll be looking at that over the next few days. So looking here at this particular chapter 7, the guilt offering portion in the first 10 verses traces back to chapter 5 and verses 14 through chapter 6 and verse number 7. Remember, these are sacrifices that had to be made along with reparations whenever it was realized that there had been some sort of defrauding done, whether that defrauding was done towards things that belong to God or things concerning their neighbor. So here we have then the sacrifices being brought to Yahweh, and the priests are playing a vital role in this, in the fact that they are the ones that are making atonements, and they're also the ones that are eating of this sacrifice. So here is the role of the priest to mediate between the one who is guilty and God, who is going to offer the forgiveness for this particular type of sin. Beginning of verse number 11 and going through verse number, through verse 21, 11 through 21, this is the fellowship offering. Remember, this is the celebration of peace with God. Thanksgiving could also be, verse 12, if he presents it for thanksgiving, but not just thanksgiving. It could also be understood as acknowledgement, or if he is offering it as praise. So this fellowship offering that is given, again, going back to the previous chapter, seeing what all could be given with these fellowship offerings. If it was given for the purpose of thanksgiving or acknowledgement or praise of God, then that would be presented to Yahweh through the priest. There would not just be the sacrifice, but there would also be unleavened cakes mixed with oil. He presents this, and the priest would then take some of the blood and splatter the blood of the fellowship offering. And then there was to be a meal that followed this. So that was true whether the sacrifice was for Thanksgiving, or whether it was for a vow, or whether it was just a free will offering of some spontaneous type of worship that they wanted to offer to God here. By worship, I mean worship of this sacrifice. With all of these, there was a meal that was to be included. And those who be able to partake in this meal was anyone who themselves was at peace with God. This was a celebration of being at peace with God, celebration of understanding the benefits of being at peace with God. For the Thanksgiving offering, that had to be eaten immediately. They could not eat it on the next day. And then for the vow offering, the free will offering, that could be eaten over the next 2 days. But by the time the third day came around, that could not be partaken of. It had to be done away with. There's also the issue of defilements, the ritual purification standard of the people. If someone was unclean, if they were defiled in a ritual sense, whether that means having eaten having become unclean for whatever reason, whether they touched something that was unclean, touched an animal or some sort of abhorrent creature, they could not eat this fellowship offering God, because at that point the defilements meant that they were not at peace with God. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything sinful that was done, but just ritually, for ritual's sake, they could not eat this. If they did, there were severe consequences, meaning they would be cut off from the people. So this peace with God, this celebration of eating this meal between the worshiper and the priest and anyone else who was there in the outer court, that was a joyous occasion. It was a good thing, but just so long as someone was at peace with God and was not currently in a state of defilement. Now, in verses 22 through 27, we have some more teaching concerning blood and fat. The fat belonged to Yahweh. It was the best. It signified the best belonging to Yahweh. But then the blood was where life is. And if God is the giver of life, then he alone has the right to be able to have this blood for himself. The people were not to eat the fat. They were not to eat the blood. Well, who are the people? Well, so often in these sacrifices, the priest had the opportunity to be supported through these sacrifices. So whenever these sacrifices are made, apart from the burnt offering, which meant the whole burnt offering where everything was burnt up on the altar, there were times that the priests were able to take certain portions of the offering and eat that for themselves. Now, this had dual purpose. Obviously, for them to be able to eat would be a way for them to have sustenance, to be supported in their work as priests. But there's also this fact, again, that they were mediating for God. So as the priest ate of this sacrifice, it was a symbol of God eating with them and having fellowship with them and acknowledging the sacrifice that they had made. Specifically, whenever it came to the priest, it seems as if there was a breast portion that was reserved for the priest, as well as the right thigh portion of the sacrifice could be given to the priest. I'd be fine with that. I like chicken thighs. That's the best in my opinion. So anything of that nature, I'd have been cool with. It wouldn't bother me at all. And the priests here were able to partake of this food and to enjoy it as well. Again, this was a permanent portion in their generations. This was how Levi's sons, the priest, would be supported by Israel. So there's this underlying principle again is as they are serving the people, they had the right to be supported by the people for the good work that they did on behalf of the people. And as I mentioned in verse 37 and 38, this concludes the laws concerning the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the ordination offering, and the fellowship sacrifice. This all goes back to what Yahweh had given to Moses while he was up on Mount Sinai receiving the law from Yahweh. And this was what they were to now begin practicing moving forward. As I mentioned, beginning in our next chapter tomorrow, chapter 8, we're going to begin looking at the ordination of Aaron and his sons and just some various subject matter concerning the priests themselves, their inaugurations in chapter 10. The well-known story about Nadab and Abihu is going to be found that was in chapter 9, the inauguration, chapter 9, chapter 10 concerning Nadab and Abihu. So we'll be looking at that over the next 3 days. Yeah, the next 3 days we have a single chapter each. So tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll look at chapter 8, Wednesday, chapter 9, and then Thursday, chapter 10. And then I think the subject matter changes again once we get to chapter 11. We'll address that whenever we get there. If you have any questions about the sacrifices today that we talked about, or any other questions about our reading, please feel free to leave those in the comment section below. And I appreciate you taking the time to read along with me today. Hope it starts your Monday off in a good way. And I look forward to this week's readings coming up in the next few days. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday, everyone. Take care. God bless.